When we go the controlling route, we're trying to make other people responsible for our limbic brain. So you have to fix my limbic brain. I need to control you so that you take away my discomfort. There's still a part of us that is a child that hasn't healed. And so you've got two toddlers in the playroom triggering each other. They're not triggering me as an emotionally intelligent adult. They're triggering my little child wounds. And then we trigger and feed off each other.
The recurring issue is relationships. People do lots of healing work, but then they continue to end up in the same relationship pattern. We learn how to relate to other people based on how we relate to our parents. On such a subconscious level, without even realizing it, we're continuously drawn into those same relationships.
Welcome back to Time with Tim. I'm Andy Carlson, here with Tim and Breanne Fletcher. Breanne is the director of our LIFT online learning program, a registered psychotherapist, and someone whose passion for healing comes directly out of her own lived experience. We met her on the podcast when I interviewed her for her personal story, and today she joins us as an expert voice alongside Tim. So we've gathered a fresh set of questions about emotional regulation, attachment wounds, relationships, healing, and the type of work that makes recovery possible. And so before we get into the main categories, I want to begin with two questions just to help us to settle into the conversation. So both of you are leaders in the LIFT and the trauma community. And I know that many people who come from shame-based backgrounds will quickly put you on a pedestal. And so before we get into the questions, would you be each willing to share maybe a recent difficulty or a place of vulnerability and how it affected you and how you processed it? And I'll let you decide between the two of you who wants to go first for this one.
I can go first. I think what I've been realizing, so kind of three things going on in my life right now that each one by itself hasn't been a big deal, but put the three together and it's like, okay, I got to figure out how to deal with this. So we've had some house renovations that have dragged on, which has inconvenienced us every day and kind of had an element of frustration and stress as part of it. And then I think the second thing to me is moving into semi-retirement and the adjustments and what does that feel and look like and kind of a new normal. And then thirdly, getting older and realizing that your brain is not as sharp as it once was. And there's days where you feel that lack of sharpness more than others. And so those three together, it's just like, there's days where I go, okay, there's a lot of limbic stuff being triggered today. And I got to just kind of let that happen and acknowledge it and validate it. But I got to stay in my cortex. And so it's kind of learning to live out of your cortex while your limbic brain is dealing with a lot of frustrating crap that is just life. And I think that's been the challenges. And I think most days I do pretty good at it. Some days are better than others. Other days you struggle a bit more. It's just, to me, that I think everybody in recovery goes through this. You got to live out of your cortex, but still acknowledge and validate your limbic and deal with your limbic. Let it kind of be there and do its thing without letting it take over. And so that's been the challenge that just I've been feeling a lot lately.
Thanks for sharing that, Tim. And I think that also, a lot of people with complex trauma, there's some desire, some expectation that our life is going to be perfect when we're healed, when we're recovered. And so it's great just as a reminder that things still happen and we still have to work with both our limbic and our cortex. And Breanne, how about for you, any recent vulnerability or something that you've been processing that you'd like to share?
Sure. I've always got something going on. Yeah, I probably have like two things that blend together as well. I think one of them is that, in the last year, I've had a lot of changes happening in my life, just different relationships. I'm kind of adding some things onto my plate. And then also at home, we host high school international students in our home. And so they just arrived in September. And so I think for the last few months, I've just been struggling to find balance in all of it, between work life, taking care of the kids' life, home life, relationship life. And so, yeah, just trying to find balance. And I think at times I've stretched myself too thin and just found that there was no time left for me at the end of the day, which I always find very ironic because there I am teaching others to practice self-care and balance and rest. And then here's me running around like a crazy lady. And I'm like, But again, the beauty of self-awareness is I could feel it building. I could feel that I wasn't making enough time for people in my life as well, but also for myself. And so integrated into that, I think, is, it's funny, we're talking about emotional regulation, is the more kind of worn thin I get, the more I struggle with my emotions. So just feeling more agitated, more edgy, less patient with people. And so those do not feed each other well when you're really tired and then starting to feel your limbic brain lighting up. But at the same time, it's been good to kind of catch those. And similar to what Tim was saying, it's like I can feel it, but I'm not going to act on it. So I might be really annoyed or angry inside, and I can recognize that it's there. But I also usually, again, I'm not perfect, but I'm usually good at saying, okay, I know I want to, say not nice things, but I'm going to just stuff it in for 24 hours and then it'll probably be gone because I know this is limbic in my cortex, even though it feels very real at the moment. So yeah, just learning how to manage the big emotions when they come up, but also working towards, and I haven't perfected this one yet, but working towards balance and still making time for myself.
I wanted to ask, like, this comes up every day, every week in classes and with clients. And it's one of the things that's the most confusing for people recovering from trauma. And it's, how do you define a healthy boundary? What does a clear boundary statement actually sound like in real life? Especially if you're recognizing that you're getting annoyed and that's something that's going on inside of you. So like, what does a healthy boundary statement sound like in real life? I'd love to know, how do you distinguish a true boundary from a rule or from a controlling statement?
Sure. I love boundaries. I love teaching classes on boundaries, although I always find myself getting carried away because they're so complex. And even in that question, it's like, well, is it an external boundary or an internal boundary? Because those are different too, of course. So I think something that I reflected on the past while around boundaries that's been really helpful for me is the idea that I think so often with boundaries, and you've already touched on this, Andy, is that often people want to use them to control, right? I need to set a boundary with my mom so that she stops acting that way. And to me, that's not a boundary. That's a false expectation. Whereas shifting that idea that boundaries are about me, what I can control, what I'm willing to accept, and what keeps me safe. So I'm never going to change, mom or anyone else. That's not my job. That's not a boundaries job. My job is to just change what I'm willing to accept and tolerate. So if mom decides to kind of continue to manipulate me or whatever, am I willing to hang up the phone? Am I willing to walk away? Am I willing to accept a boundary? Because she's not going to stop trying to manipulate me. So I think in terms of external boundaries, it's really helpful to create that distinction of not changing other people, not controlling other people, but just being willing to adjust how I react to things and what I'm willing to accept and what I think is okay for myself. And then I think internal boundaries kind of go back to what you were talking about in terms of my own experience. And that's a hard one. Because I think with that comes so much self-awareness, right? You have to be self-aware in order to catch yourself. So, for example, one boundary that I have for myself that's really helpful is I go to yoga every morning. And so don't get me wrong, there are some days where the last thing I want to do is yoga because I'm really tired or I didn't sleep well the night before or it's cold outside. But being able to say like, hey, I've committed this to myself. This is a boundary. And I find what's helpful is thinking long term. So you know what? By the middle of the day, I'm going to be really thankful that I did this. And so being able to follow through with that boundary. It's like parenting myself. Sometimes I want to stamp my little feet and say, no, I don't want to do it, but we do it anyways. And so, yeah, I think just being able to stick to those boundaries that we've set ourselves, which take a lot of kind of limbic control, just like when I'm feeling cranky and have to say, I'm not going to act out in this, that's a boundary for myself. I'm going to sit with this for a couple hours or, certain things that I know annoy me that are my own stuff. Even though they piss me off every single time, I go like, damn it, I know this is my own stuff, so I have to shut up about it. And so, yeah, I think internal and external are so different because internal, there's no one to be accountable to except for myself. But external are also very difficult because I think for me, something that I struggle with and most people struggle with is there's a fear that comes up with external boundaries, a fear of abandonment, a fear of rejection. And so even, for example, if I wanted to, take an hour off in the evening just for myself, go to my room, I go to fear mode of, well, am I going to hurt someone's feelings? Is someone going to be mad at me? Is someone going to think I'm selfish? And so I have to be able to separate that codependent reliance on how people feel about me or what they think about me and still be able to prioritize, again, with balance, because I can't lean into selfish either, but to be able to recognize kind of that false guilt that often arises when I'm setting a boundary and be able to look at it from the big picture, again, from a cortex perspective, what's healthy for me, and do it anyways. So yeah, I could talk about boundaries for a really long time, but I think that's the best quick summary I can give. And then I'll let Tim go.
If I can just nuance this discussion. So to add to what Breanne has said, so I realized 30, 40 years ago that I had kind of audio sensitivity, so that people chewing their food, people sniffing, people clearing their throat just can grate on my nerves. Especially if I'm tired, it's just wow, that's just sends me like fingers on a chalkboard. It just is that kind of sound in my ears. And so get married and my wife comes in and wants to crunch on some peanuts or popcorn or something in the evening, and I'm just jumping here wanting to say something, and then my brain wants to go to get angry and say something cruel and why are you so inconsiderate and blah blah blah. And so it's real. So the dilemma is I realize, okay, this is my stuff. There's an audio sensitivity, but I don't want to sit every night and just be on edge and getting angry. So I need to make her aware of it, and we need to figure out how to make this work. And so I talked about it, and then Kim went to shame and felt I was saying she was a terrible person. No, this is my stuff. I just want to help us together so that you kind of know how to work with my stuff and the awareness of my stuff. And so there's going to be times where I have to just put my filters in place. You can have your bag of popcorn and I'm not going to say a thing, even though I'm irritated. And there's other times where you're just not going to have a bag of popcorn that night. And so I had to learn there's a certain window of tolerance within that audio sensitivity, that some days I handle audio sounds better than others. And other days, the slightest audio sound just sends me over the edge. It's just, I'm too tired. I'm too run down. I don't have the emotional reserves to handle that. So I had to have a certain amount of awareness. So what Kim and I worked out, especially in the evenings when I'm tired, is if she wants a snack, she goes, are you able to kind of handle me munching on something tonight? And without guilt, I can say yes or no. And she respects that. And so it's taken several years for us to really kind of work out how to make that work. And I think that's what Breanne's talking about with the complexity of boundaries. That's just one example. And so some of that's an internal boundary that I have to have filters and just, that's my stuff, deal with it. But when you're in a relationship, there's external boundaries that got to get sorted out too, and compromises and communication. And that can change on any given day, depending on my internal state. And so that's really what, to me, you're working on. And so part of that is there had to be a lot of communication around that boundary. Whereas some days when Kim comes in and it's like she just starts chewing on stuff and I get a little bit dysregulated by it, I just have to go, okay, I'm being triggered. That's my stuff. Don't say anything. I'm not going to talk here. I'm either going to leave the room or I'm just going to deal with it internally. So some days I speak, some days I don't say anything. And so I think the danger for people with boundaries is they're always looking for these simple black and white rules. And it's not possible. There are just so many factors that have to be weighed in, and you gradually learn those factors over time and experience. There's no magic little book that you can give a person that covers every scenario with every possible relationship and personality. This is a learning process that people have to go through. in intimate relationships.
I'll just ask one quick follow-up. Why is it so easy for me to go to the controlling route rather than maybe more of a negotiated boundary route or the healthy boundary route where I recognize that it's my action, that I need to do something?
I would say when we go the controlling route, we're trying to make other people responsible for our limbic brain. So you have to fix my limbic brain. So I need to control you so that you take away my discomfort. So it's still outsourcing my mental health, my internal state to other people, but now I must control them. And so it always backfires in the long run. Whereas a boundary is I'm taking agency and ownership for my own well-being. I'm being responsible to take care of me and meet my needs. So to me, it's very much the difference between outsourcing and insourcing and trying to make others responsible for regulating my limbic brain.
Yeah, and I think if I were to add something to that, Andy, I think often when people are in early recovery, boundaries do have to be bit more, not necessarily controlling, but rigid. Because Tim was talking about like we want to go to this black and white rule, right? Because it just feels safer, it feels clearer. And so I think often in early recovery, they're not self-aware enough. They're not able to manage the nuances or navigate kind of that in between. And so kind of rigid boundaries feel safe. But to me, that's not a bad thing because there are times that that's okay. So somebody who's in early recovery, maybe from an alcohol addiction, they're not going to go anywhere near a bar. They might have people over and say, no one's allowed to bring alcohol to this family gathering. It's too triggering and all of that. And like Tim said, yes, in some way it's outsourcing. It's expecting other people to do that. But I think in early recovery with safe people, that's okay. You're saying, I'm too weak right now. I don't have all the tools to manage this. So can you guys support me in this? Whereas the more you get into that healing journey, the more I'm able to say, okay, I continue to work on my own triggers, the underlying stuff. So now that stuff is going to be less triggering to me because we don't want to stay stuck in our triggers too or controlled by these fears or inabilities, right? We're always trying to work on ourselves. And so the more we're able to do that, the more we become self-aware, the more we're able to communicate, the more we can go into this gray area of boundaries where I know I have the abilities to navigate it. I know I have the tools. I know I have the courage to talk to people as issues come up. And I'm aware of myself enough. And yeah, I think for myself, when I first went into recovery, I would go nowhere near alcohol. Now I could care less if someone's drinking right beside me because that doesn't activate me. So I don't have to put as much expectation on other people because I can now own that for myself. And so I do think, again, more nuances. There's a journey to it and boundaries are always changing the more we're healing. So yeah, that would be one piece I would add.
I think a lot of people let's say mom continues to phone every day and then disrespect you, etc. So you set a boundary and you try to control mom. It's very much a control. It's not about protecting yourself or treating yourself with respect. You're trying to change mom. And what I've seen with a lot of people is they do that because they're really avoiding looking at another possible boundary that they need to set, which is mom is toxic. Mom is a narcissist. Mom is not going to change. I need to set quite a severe boundary with mom where I have very little contact. They're not ready to go there yet because that would be too much grief, too much loss. It would take them to some pretty deep issues that they're not ready to go to. So to avoid kind of the right decision, boundary-wise, they try to go to a control type boundary. And that's, I'm going to manage mom and hopefully change her because I just can't go to saying, mom, you're out of my life for now. That would be too severe a boundary. That would be too hard to do.
I like that both of those follow-ups add layers in different directions. One is there's this depth, this layer looking inside ourselves that maybe we're less aware of or we don't know how to face yet. But then also Breanne's like, often I see recovery as a ladder. And so just recognizing that your boundaries on rung one of that ladder will look different from the nuance on rung two, which will look different from the flexibility on rung three as you move and as you go through that. And I think talking about that, it's a great segue into just kind of the next topic, and I have several questions that relate to emotional regulation and the internal world. Tim's last example of like, maybe I don't know what's going on with mom, or maybe it's too dangerous. When somebody's overwhelmed and they can't access that logic part of their brain, what's the first step? Like, how do they begin to get re-anchored in the present?
So I think two things come to mind. So basically, like what you're saying, yeah, is if you're trying to deal with mom or whatever, you become too dysregulated, how to get to clear thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I work with my clients all the time on this one, right? Because it's often in the moment or when they're feeling their emotions, they're trying to find a decision. Or, when they're in a conflict, they're like, well, how do I fix the conflict? Step one is step back, just take some time, because we can't actually ground ourselves or de-escalate ourselves once we've been triggered in particular. There's emotional dysregulation, right? We have some normal stresses, some healthy anger or whatever it may be. But once we're triggered and there's other stuff coming up from our past, it can really spiral us. And so what we need to do is we need to get away from that situation into a place where I can think clearly again, because we've all been in that place. Our emotions, our brain just feels flooded, right? Nothing really feels clear. It's really murky. And often when we look back on those situations where we did make decisions, we're like, yeah, that was probably the worst thing I could have done. Oopsie doops. So a huge thing is time. And you know what? Sometimes that might even for some, it can take an hour, right? I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm going to clear my head. Often focusing on something else can really help. Because some people say, well, I go for a walk, but then I'm just obsessing about it the whole time. Well, that's not kind of what we're saying, right? Like, you also don't want to hyperfixate on it. Go listen to a podcast, go watch a show, go call a friend, go do whatever it is, go for a run. Because if we can get our brain out of that, then the emotions calm down in turn, because our emotions aren't attached to the thoughts that we keep feeding in our head. And so often just a bit of space. Again, for some, it could be a day or two just because you're so caught up in it, and that's all right as well. So really a key piece is don't make any decisions or don't say anything until you've given yourself a chance to calm down. But I think another really key piece in it is talking to somebody else, because even once I've calmed down from that initial heightened emotion, I'm still in my own perspective. I'm still looking through it through a lens of my own wounds and my own trauma. And so I cannot always see it clearly. And so it is often calling up somebody who you trust, of course, a safe person, not somebody who's just going to feed your negative emotions or whatever perspective, but somebody who can hear you out, who may challenge it and be like, is that the best decision right now? Or be able to offer another perspective. Or for some, you're just verbal processors. I'm a verbal processor. Journaling is not the life for me, and I have to talk it out. Even if I don't hear advice from the other person, often just by saying out loud, sometimes like, oh yeah, that sounds stupid when I say it out loud. Maybe that isn't the best choice. But really, it's just giving yourself a chance to bounce it off somebody you trust who has a more grounded perspective in it. Their own emotions aren't tied up in it. And then you can often get back to a place where you can just see it more clearly or address it in a healthier way. So it's really finding different ways to get you out of the limbic experience, whatever that looks like for you, but then be able to talk to somebody you trust.
It's almost, we don't even need to think of anything else if we're in that limbic space, but it's to create space and find space. And then the second thing, you can add the layer on top of it, is to add time and to allow there to be time to come out of the limbic. And then the third one is seeking support and finding an unbiased or a healthy form of support.
I've been thinking quite a bit over the last couple of months about I think it's an important perspective for people with complex trauma to understand. So we talk about the infant, that they need a co-regulator. So a baby has no ability to regulate their own emotions. Their emotions are regulated by connecting to somebody who's regulated, and then that person, they begin to mirror their emotions, and they learn tools to regulate. So mom rocks them and talks to them and sings to them and pats them on the back and all of that, and it calms them down. So we need a co-regulator. What I think people need to understand is when you get into an intimate relationship in adult life where you're attuned to the other person, you're connected to the other person, without even realizing it, they actually also become a co-regulator to a degree. and their emotions are contagious to you and your emotions are contagious to them. And so for many people, intimate relationships are where they have the greatest dysregulation problems, and it's not being triggered from external stuff in their wound. It's when their intimate person gets triggered because they're dysregulated. Now I get dysregulated because I am mirroring their emotional state. And so what I see over and over again as I work with clients is after a while, like they get through all of the triggers of their wounds in recovery, but after a while, their greatest trigger is when their partner's dysregulated. And so it's really realizing, wow, there's still a co-regulator in my world. And so I need to have them as a co-regulator when they're calm. But when they're dysregulated, I got to find a way to detach a little bit emotionally so that I don't take on their stuff and get dysregulated myself. So it's going to be what Breanne's talking about. You got to find ways to ground yourself, get back to your cortex, regulate yourself, talk to somebody. But there also has to be, I'm connected but detached. Because for many from complex trauma, connection means codependency. I'm now responsible for you. I now absorb you and all of your moods. So that's why when you're dysregulated, I get so dysregulated. So to me, it takes a special set of tools to learn, and you don't learn those overnight. It's very, very kind of university level of learning tools, but it's really that whole co-regulator thing isn't just an infant issue. It's an intimate relationship issue through life. And it's a huge factor for many people in complex trauma that when their co-regulator is dysregulated, they become dysregulated.
I think all I'm going to take from what you just said is that complex trauma is contagious. But recognizing this co-regulation and the dysregulation and the attunement, and when you take that advice of detaching or finding that space, when your partner has maybe a high degree of shame or their own attachment wounds, kind of how could you talk about like how you navigate that when you taking that healthy space is interpreted as rejection or abandonment or some form of shame?
Yeah, I'll say a few things and let Breanne comment, because again, this is such a nuanced thing. So I think if Kim is dysregulated and I can feel myself wanting to go to dysregulation. So a couple things is I have to have an internal dialogue, number one, where I just go, that's her stuff, etc. But then I have to go to explore, which is this anything I've done? Is there something should I ask her? Is there anything I can do to help? Or do I just stay quiet and let her work through it? And I think over years of living with Kim, I've kind of figured out when I need to ask her if she needs any help, whether I just kind of leave her because I know she's got the tools to handle it. And Kim's a verbal processor like Breanne. And so she just sometimes needs to vent some of the steam that's building up. And it's nothing about me. It's not a shot at me. She just got to get it out, and I got to let her and not get dysregulated by it. So to me, it's gradually learning, when do I say something? When do I offer? When do I just leave it? Know that they have the tools. To me, early on, I tried to confront it, but what I learned was to confront it when they're dysregulated usually makes it worse. So I need to come back to it once they're regulated a day or two later and say, can we talk about what happened? And this isn't to blame anybody. This isn't to say you failed or anything. It's to understand, to know and learn how to handle it next time it happens, to handle it better. So what can you do? What can I do? How do we communicate? So that took years of working through different things, but it was coming back after the fact. Once we'd learned that, then if she was dysregulated, I could say, okay, this isn't the time to talk about it, but we can come back to it. And she wouldn't get offended. If I had said that earlier, she would see that as me kind of dismissing her, disrespecting her, not taking her seriously, all of that. We had built enough of an understanding that I could say, you're dysregulated, this isn't the time. And she would really kind of realize we're going to come back to this maybe later and talk about it. So there's a complexity to that and to intimate relationships and years of learning how to navigate through that. That is, I think, what people just have to accept. It's a journey. There's not a quick fix that just magically makes all this go away. But both people have to be willing to engage in the process of learning and talking about it.
Okay, I have so many thoughts. So we'll try to summarize this because I think this is such a big topic, right? It's one thing to learn how to manage your own dysregulation, but when it's with others, especially, your closest partner, it becomes really complicated. And it's something I still struggle with, to be honest. So I'm not in a relationship, but I live with my sister. We've lived together for 6 years. So there's a lot of parallels because she's my closest person. I'm with her every day. The second I feel that she's dysregulated, my codependency becomes so strong. And like Tim was saying, you become so attuned to each other, even if it's the smallest thing that if somebody on the outside were looking in at, they would have no clue there was something going on, but we can both feel it so intensely. There's just like a tension in the air. So I think one of the hardest things for people is walking away from it because then it feels unresolved. And what does unresolved equal? Those from childhood trauma? Well, that just means more pain. And so I think for a lot of people, they do want to go into it, address it while they're still dysregulated. But like Tim says, that doesn't help either. And so something that's really helped me, because again, if she's dysregulated, often it has nothing to do with me. Sometimes it does. But what I have to remind myself is she's allowed to feel feelings too. Just because she's angry, just because she's sad, of course she's allowed to. I feel those too. I don't expect somebody to come fix mine right away. I just need a moment. I just need time. And so I often have to remind myself, okay, she's allowed to get triggered. She's allowed to have her moments. And it's not my job to fix them because often, just like from my own experience, I just need a bit of time in it. And then it disappears. And so I think one of the golden rules I figured out, Tim taught me this one actually, in terms of like when do you address it and when do you leave it, is you wait 24 hours. So often by the time I'm asleep, I wake up in the morning and the smallest little thing is irrelevant. I forget about it. But if I wake up and it's the first thing I'm still thinking about, okay, then there's something going on here that probably needs to be followed up with. Now, of course, most people from complex trauma also hate conflict. And so then it's like maybe another 24 hours. We don't really want to talk about this, right? But it's like that's kind of the rule I try to stick with is if I'm still feeling a strong emotion the next morning, then maybe something needs to be addressed. But then again, nuances and time and healing, I have to learn how to step into not necessarily conflict, but uncomfortable conversations. Because if I do address something, maybe I did do something wrong. Maybe she is mad at me and now I have to face those emotions. So it becomes really complex internally, I think. But I think one other thing I would add in terms of how to deal with dysregulation within a relationship is both people have to be working on their stuff. So I have a lot of clients come to me and they start learning tools and we learn about grounding. Just last week, I had a client and she has lots of conflict with her partner. And so I was like, okay, well, we've been talking about when your partner's triggered and she's going off on you, you need to just walk away. And she said to me, she's like, I did, Breanne. I walked away 4 times and she kept chasing me. And what do you do, right? So, of course, we talked about, okay, then maybe take a drive or something, like go out of the house where she cannot catch you. But it's the reality that if both people aren't becoming aware, trying to use these tools, it's like talking to a wall. And so it's really hard to navigate. And so I think just like in any relationship and like any conflict, if you're trying to get healthier, it makes a world of difference if you're both on a similar journey and both being open to talking about things, both becoming aware of your shame, of your emotion. Otherwise, that one person can just remain dysregulated or continue to blame or continue to act out in the limbic state. And it makes it really hard as a couple or, within relationship to manage dysregulation.
One of the most difficult things for people with complex traumas, there's a layer of patience here. Maybe sometimes having a bright line rule is recognizing what, maybe there's an attachment wound, maybe there's this codependency, this urgency to resolve, but recognizing that as a rule and then being able to use that patience. I think both of you make such an important point too of just the partner, having a partner who's willing to work with you.
It's great to talk about boundaries and all of the emotional regulation stuff. But I think what is so important for people to understand is if you haven't dealt with the shame codependency issues, all of this talk becomes just talk. Really, the codependency undermines it repeatedly. So let me explain what I mean. When a child is raised in complex trauma, they're kind of trained in codependency. So your needs don't matter. You got to take care of mom and dad's needs. You got to sacrifice yourself. You got to put others ahead of you. And that's kind of presented as love. That's presented as being selfless and giving and all of that. It's really kind of, you're made to feel self-righteous for being so giving and kind and putting your needs down. And then you're made to feel guilty for having needs, for expressing your needs, for standing up for yourself. You're called proud, you're called selfish, all of that. So there's a whole indoctrination, gaslighting thing that causes people to develop this codependency thinking. But more than that, it's dad's upset, it's the kid's fault. Mom's depressed, it's the kid's fault. So you're trained that if you just figure out what to do, you can fix other people's emotions. You can take care of their emotions. It's on you. That is so subtle. That is bred into you without you even realizing it. So what happens for many people when they come into adult relationships is if somebody's dysregulated, they think there's got to be something I can do to fix it. And what Breanne is saying is we got to stop that. We got to go, they have a right to have feelings. They need to learn tools. I got to give them space. So you take that farther with people and it's, okay, I should be able to fix it. But then you go, I don't want to give them space because if they're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable. And if I fix them, I'm solving my own problems. I'm solving my own discomfort. So the codependency ultimately is I take care of you so I feel better. That's the underlying stuff that people really have to get to in all of this dysregulation is our whole orientation is the only way to feel better yourself is you got to fix everybody else. That's the bottom line. And if I don't change that script, I will continue to struggle with boundaries. I'll continue to struggle with regulation because I'm still operating off a faulty script.
I think that's actually a great nuance for what my next question was going to be. And I'll direct this to you, Tim, first is, so how do you recognize, how can we begin to tell when that emotional reaction belongs to our younger wounded self or when it may be something that's coming from our adult self?
It's an excellent question. So I think the first thing I'd say to people is my first response when I'm triggered is I'm in my limbic brain and there's emotional reasoning happening. So I think the truth is based on what I feel, not on the facts. And so when I'm in my limbic brain and I'm triggered, it's always the other person's fault. I can always find a reason why they're causing me to feel this way. I cannot see that it's a wound being triggered. I cannot see that it's my stuff. So in the moment, I have very, very little ability to accurately assess whose side of the street needs to be cleaned up here. Because in that place, there's almost entitlement, self-righteousness, narcissism that begins to happen, that it's everybody else's fault. And if you hadn't done this, if you hadn't done this, you did that, you did that. So I have to be able to withhold assessment or judgment until I calm down enough for a long enough time that I'm able to look more objectively. So another way to say that is when I'm triggered, my world gets skewed and distorted that I can't see reality accurately. I think I can, but I can't. And pity the person that tries to point it out to me because they're the one that's distorted. So it's really beginning to realize that I have to recognize. And so how I figured out for myself was early in marriage, Kim and I would have things and I would immediately see all the things that she was doing that was causing me to be upset. After a couple of days, I would go, ooh, I don't think I quite saw that correctly. Yes, there was some things she did, but there is stuff in me. And so it was beginning to realize, okay, 2 or 3 days later, I'm always seeing things slightly different than I saw in the moment. Okay, when I'm in the moment, I need to remember that and go, don't try to take your thoughts right now to the bank as the facts. Withhold judgment. And that was my own internal process that I had to get to. And then it was really beginning to figure out 2 or 3 days from now, okay, now I can sit down and talk about this and explore this and begin to understand, is this stuff my stuff, your stuff, both of our stuff? How do we begin to respond in the moment? How do we begin to sort out all of that? So it was discussions a couple of days after the fact that became the most fruitful discussions. It was never the discussions in the moment that brought about any good realizations or change. And that's tough because it was really realizing I got to wait for a while until I get more objective before I can even enter into these waters to begin to learn how to navigate through this stuff.
I'm hearing of this 24 to 48 hour patience window coming through again. Breanne, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
For sure. Because again, it's a 24, 48 hour period, and it's really annoying because sometimes, again, that means sitting in discomfort for those that extended period of time. But I think in terms of like being able to recognize when I'm triggered or when it's little Breanne responding, 2 things come to mind for me. And one would be that my voice tone changes. So you can probably hear it in other people as you start to recognize these things, but being able to recognize it in myself, usually I go up a pitch or 2. And there's kind of just like, it's an emotion, it's an urgency. And if I can start recognizing that my voice has gone up, then I'm like, okay, something's going on here. But I think the other piece is, and I don't know who can relate to this, hopefully some people, but it's just like my brain feels spinnier, right? So I think it's that something's happened and my brain is like, just kind of in frantic thoughts almost, if I were to put it into those words, and just kind of going really fast. Or again, like Tim says, I go straight into very negative and critical. So really just trying to put that person down. And I think it's because when we're triggered, there's almost always an element of shame within it, right? Because if we were to ladder down from a trigger to our child self, there's usually, fear or anger or hurt. But underneath that is the shame belief that I'm not good enough. And so when I can catch myself acting out of that, what I'm trying to do is put people down below me. So you're wrong, you're less than, you suck. And all of a sudden I'll start pulling stuff from the past too. It's not just about the moment anymore. I'm going through my grocery list of things I don't like about that person. And it's like, whoa. This feels really big for the situation at hand. And again, that's often what it is when things start becoming bigger. That's what a trigger is than the present moment calls for. So while I often cannot recognize that fully in the moment, these are the things I've started to track within myself that really help. But same thing, as soon as I have time to calm down and am able to start seeing any part I've played in it, that's when I'm shifting back into a more clear state. And then usually I'm kicking myself a little or resistant, I should say, because I'm like, no, it wasn't me. Damn it. Maybe I did do something wrong there. But it's that same very selfish, self-centered perspective where I want it to be all their fault. And so as soon as I can start looking at my stuff, which takes a while to clear kind of that shame reaction and those spinning thoughts, then I'm usually getting to a better place. Usually still a little bit more time since we're really loving the time aspect here. But yeah, that's what I would add.
So there's really this awareness of kind of just these mental and emotional patterns that are going on. And you touch the shame, and so you touch something that's going on underneath. Like so many trauma survivors live with this very harsh inner critic. And so how do you differentiate, or how do you come even to a place where there's healthy self-reflection versus having maybe more of self-attacking thoughts?
I think, it's a good question, Andy. I think one piece I would say is there emotion involved in it? Because if I'm healthy self-reflecting, I can just look at that and go, okay, yeah, this happened. I should probably do this. This is how I'm going to work on it, and come at it from a very clear and emotionless or near emotionless perspective, or maybe just regulated emotions. Versus I think when it's that attacking inner critic, there's that shame, there's that beating yourself up, there's that anger at yourself. All of that, it feels a lot more intense. And we often get flooded with that self-hatred or embarrassment, guilt, all of that. So I'd say when there's really strong emotions involved in it, and two, when it's not constructive. If I'm just beating myself up for the sake of beating myself up and thinking that I'm a piece of crap, that's not constructive. Versus when it's reflective, what I want to be able to do is, I can own that, I didn't do a very good job, but that doesn't make me a bad person. That makes me human, right? That's the difference between shame versus a healthy guilt. Just to say, oh yeah, oops, I messed up. So then it's to go to, okay, so what do I need to do? Step one, I need to apologize to that person. And kind of make this right. Step two, I need to be able to reflect on this in the way that I can catch it next time, or I can think about how I can start doing things differently, or I can heal this new part that's exposed itself through this conflict or issue or whatever it is. Yeah, that's what I would say the difference is.
Can I add a little bit here? If I go back to codependency, so codependency trained in a child is usually a child who is a relationship with a parent who's acting narcissistic or is a narcissist. Both end up with shame. So the one with shame is, I'm terrible, and you have that strong inner critic. The narcissist has suppressed all of that and is compensated for that, and it's, I'm superior to everybody, I love myself, etc. So what happens often then in conflict where one is dysregulated, etc., is the true kind of codependent goes to, it must be my fault. And so they go looking for owning their part, because if I own my part, I can fix it. Whereas the narcissist basically it is their fault. I'm not going to own anything, and I'm not willing to go there. And so what I want people to realize is kind of the proclivity of a codependent is they go looking for, it must be my fault. And they're very quick to own their side of the street, but they're not able to say, but the other person's at fault too. And they need to own that's terrifying for them to confront the other person with, this is your fault. The other aspect to this is what comes out of much of complex trauma is that black and white, all or nothing thinking. So if there's conflict, it's either all my fault or all their fault. To be able to begin to go, yeah, it's 30% my fault, 70% their fault. I don't know how to do that because it's either all of them or all of me. And so it's really beginning to learn, hey, there's two sides of the street. There's some dirt on your side. There's some dirt on my side. Let's figure out kind of what my dirt is, what your dirt is. Let's not worry about percentages. Let's just make sure we both clean up our side of the street. That's thinking about conflict in new ways. And that's willing to own my stuff, but requiring that they also own their stuff and work on their stuff. And I can't fix the relationship just by fixing my side of the street. It takes two to tango. So again, there's understories that must be considered in light of codependency to really navigate through these questions well.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to turn it back to Breanne. I want to ask more about what Tim just said here about this side of the street. Can you help shed some awareness of like how we can, with coming out of the shame or the blame or codependence, like coming back to looking at our own side of the street?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Or because I think shame makes it so hard to look at our side of the street. And again, like Tim said, it depends on kind of where you fall versus like codependent versus narcissist, because a narcissist will never own their stuff. But for a narcissist to be able to say, I might have screwed up too, there's a flood of shame. And so I think a big part of healing, like step one is just being able to recognize it internally. But step two is being able to say it out loud. Because I know for myself, sometimes I get great thoughts in the shower. This is often where I calm down and I'm like, oh, yeah, I did something there too. But to then actually go to the person and say, I screwed up too, that's where it gets even more terrifying. Because from that deep shame, there's that belief that if I'm not perfect or if I have flaws, they're going to leave me. They're going to reject me. And so to be able to admit that I am not superior or perfect or I'm screwing up, there's that underlying fear, I think, of rejection. But I also think like within that, on the codependent side, there's just a fear of acknowledging that I hurt somebody, right? To actually talk about it and then bring that vulnerability into the space. I might know I've hurt somebody, and in the past, I've been really good at throwing it just like a quick, like, yeah, sorry, let's move on. So I've acknowledged it. Maybe that's step 2. And then I want to shuffle past the emotions of it, but to actually sit down and be able to have a conversation about it and let them express their feelings, to go, yeah, you did screw up and that really hurt me. That's taking it to another level, because kind of like what Tim was talking about earlier, now I have to face their uncomfortable emotions. It's one thing to acknowledge it intellectually, but to actually sit with their pain that I brought on, that can just be, yeah, a scary, vulnerable, and really humbling experience. And so, but really important, because I think with relationships, it's so important to be able to own it. But again, kind of like Tim was talking about, on the flip side, I often have clients who take all the blame on themselves every single time. And my job is actually helping them to start to shift, to be like, no, I think your partner screwed up on that one. Maybe you were actually doing the right thing by, I don't know, setting a boundary or getting angry at them, even, to be honest. Anger is so terrifying, but sometimes it needs to be there. And so I think for a codependent, if their partner were to bring it to their side of the street and look at them, then they actually want to go, oh, no, it's okay, it's not your fault. And they forgive too quickly, because now all of a sudden they're uncomfortable with somebody else owning their part. And again, discomfort and emotions, discomfort and vulnerability, they don't want that person feeling uncomfortable. It goes back to that child who's always trying to fix the parent's emotions. So again, I think it's very nuanced, but important to kind of see which side you fall onto, right? Are you always taking on all the blame for yourself? Or do you really struggle to own your part in it and say that out loud? So it's tricky, but yeah. As we know with complex trauma, everything is nuanced and complicated.
If I can just wrap up one little thing with this, Sandy. To me, such an important thing that people need to understand is that intimate relationships, though you love each other, though you're using healthy tools, you still will hurt each other, because you don't understand each other on any given day perfectly. You don't respond perfectly. None of us is perfect. So there will be injury. So a big part of relationships, intimate relationships, is repair. Every injury is repairable. But this is where it gets tricky for people with codependency, because they go to, it's all on me to repair it. I'm the one that's going to repair it. And it's like, no, repair can only happen when both people are engaged humbly in looking at it, owning their side of the street, talking about it, sitting in the emotions of it. Then repair happens. Repair is never a one-sided thing. And so again, I think people have expectations, first of all, that if I am doing recovery, I will get to a relationship where we never injure each other. Not possible. Secondly, repair can be one-sided. Not possible. And so both of those, I think, are important reality checks for people in recovery to make sure their expectations aren't unrealistic.
I love the direction that both of you went here, because it actually leads perfectly into what my next question was. So when we think about repair, the repair is where healthy happens. And I like the clarity that, like, in a relationship, we will hurt each other, because I think that's not a belief that most people have. So I just want to sit on that for a second. But looking as a codependent who normally takes blame, there's anger, you have your abandonment wounds that were mentioned. How can somebody begin to tell the difference between maybe their own abandonment fear and something that may be a normal level of hurt versus actual relational unsafety when you grew up in a home where you were responsible when the adult was triggered, you were responsible for other people's emotions? And so let me turn that to you first, Tim.
Yeah, I think Breanne's going to have the bulk of this stuff to say here. I just wanted to say a couple things with this. First of all, when we talk about relationships, hurt does happen. I just need to put in a qualifier that narcissists will use that and say they will intentionally hurt their partner and go, oh, well, Tim said hurt happens in relationships, so just accept it and deal with it. No, I'm talking about unintentional hurt. I'm talking about just being human. I'm not talking about a narcissist taking that truth and abusing it to now I can justify hurting you and make it your problem. So that to me just needs to be clarified, that what that person is doing is owning that they hurt you, but now excusing that they have to change their behavior. So it's really, I think, so that's one piece. Then to your question, and it's kind of tied in, but when the smoke from a fire is bigger than the fire, then and there's something going on here beyond just a fire. And so it's really for people to realize that people with complex trauma in the here and now today, when something happens, it's triggering events in the here and now. Their 12 needs aren't being met. There's lack of justice. There's lack of love. There's lack of respect. And so I should respond if my needs aren't being met, if there's lack of love happening. That will give a certain degree of fire and smoke. But people with complex trauma, those events trigger lack of justice in their childhood, lack of respect in their childhood, lack being abandoned in their childhood. Now you've got smoke like crazy happening. And so it's really realizing that when events happen today, usually I get triggered on two levels, present and past. And so I need to be able to stop and go, yes, I'm feeling abandoned today. Is it based on my past or based on my present? Okay, let's look at it. It feels like they're abandoning me because they're not answering my texts. They're kind of criticizing a suggestion that I have. They're out talking to their friends when I was hoping they'd spend this evening at home. That feels like abandonment. In fact, it could be abandonment, but it's too early to know for sure. So now I got to go in two directions. This could be just my past, that it was abandoned, so this is feeling similar. But also I need to sit and wait for a while and see, are they repeatedly putting their friends ahead of me? Are they repeatedly putting other things ahead of me? If so, that needs to be confronted, because now I'm back to not being seen, not being valued, not being treated with respect. Our relationship can't be healthy if that continues. So again, it's nuanced. There's a bunch of different factors, and you can't get all of the answers right here and now. I have to explore, and then I have to give time to wait for more evidence to come in.
Yeah, lots of thoughts popping up, of course, as Tim talks. So I guess, just to kind of go back, Andy, the main question is, how do you determine whether it's a past situation or a present situation, and just distinguishing the difference?
Yeah. And I think I even made it a little bit harsher, not harsher, but a stronger distinguishing, how do you distinguish between maybe the normal relational hurt and abandonment wounds, your past, your abandonment wounds, from actual relational unsafety? So there's a question of degree that I think gets put into this.
Right. That's a really good question. I think a main thing, and it kind of ties into what Tim was saying about the narcissist kind of just saying, oh yeah, it happens. A big piece to look at is, if they hurt me and it's a normal relational hurt, what were their intentions behind it, right? Again, so maybe somebody didn't text me back. Maybe they genuinely forgot, or maybe they kind of got too busy or saw it and didn't care, or whatever it is. So it's trying to understand. And again, sometimes this has to happen through conversation. I can't read people's mind. But also trying to go off of the character of who I know the person to be, right? Are they the type to ignore me, or are they a little spacey and forget things? And if so, can I write that off to an unintentional hurt? But I think kind of bringing the narcissist piece in, it's how are they going to respond from the hurt? Right? Are they willing to look at it and willing to change, or does the same thing keep happening? To me, that's when the relationship starts to become unsafe, because the person isn't willing to make changes. And so even though they know that behavior hurts me, they're not doing anything about it. So that's where it's starting to become intentional in a subconscious way, because they're not intentionally making changes to change. They're not making changes to strengthen the relationship. They're not making changes to lessen my hurts. And so I think both of those pieces is, one is, how do they respond? How do they change? How do they improve? But also going to their character in their past, right? So are they the type of person to forget things? Are they the type of person to be, even if you were to look at somebody who's maybe more abrupt in their language, Is that just how they were raised? Is that how they talk? Are they not so good at softening the edges of their words? So again, that would look at the intentions. Were they trying to hurt me? Was that intended to be said with cruelty? Or is that just who they are? And it might be triggering something from my past around abrupt language.
What was very helpful to me early in marriage was if I was upset with Kim, is her behavior something that violates love? So is she being disrespectful? Is she lying? Is she doing something hurtful? Or is this just something that inconveniences my preferences? I want to go to bed at this time and she's wanting to stay up. I like this kind of music, she doesn't, and I'm annoyed. And so it's really realizing, is this kind of a moral type of violate love versus a preference thing that is so important? So let me give you an example, and this gets very nuanced. So I was raised that to be on time means you're 10 minutes early. And the value was you're considerate of other people. And so it's better to get there and wait for 10 minutes because at least you're there and you've been considerate. And so you inconvenience yourself to make sure you're there. In case something goes wrong, you give yourself a bit of a window so that you always make sure you're there. Kim was raised that you're on time if you're there on the dot or even a minute or two late. And so we get married and say, you got to be there somewhere at 11 o'clock. We got to leave the house at 11 o'clock. Well, I'm ready to go out the door at 10:02. Kim's still got 3 things on her list of things to do before she's ready to go out the door. And if anything goes wrong, she could be a minute or two late. And I'm getting revved up inside and angry about this. And so quickly I begin to realize, okay, this is how I was raised. This is partly me. This is my expectation of what on time means, which isn't necessarily accurate, but the value is being considerate of other people. Kim was raised with, you be there on time, but if you have a couple of things that come up, well, you're delayed. And I go, well, that's not considerate. So we had to have a lot of conversations about kind of getting our value system correct. Because the immediate thing is, are you on time or not? And I go, that's not even the issue anymore. It's what does being considerate of others mean? That's really what we're talking about here. And so let's get on the same page with, we want to be considerate of other people. Okay. Then it was, sometimes when you say you're going to be ready, things come up and then all of a sudden it takes longer than you expected. So being considerate now for you violated. It's not that you're on time, you violated being considerate. Okay, so we had to reframe all of that. But then it was, I got to cool my jets when I start to get antsy, like it's 5:02 and you're not ready to go out the door yet. And it was like, I got to adjust my expectations, but I have to communicate that morning. Okay, we agreed to leave at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Let's everybody make sure they've got everything ready. They've thought through the morning, and just communicate about that so that when we get to that point, we're not going to be late because somebody forgot something. So it's in that so you go from a moral thing to a preference thing to a value thing. And when you combine all of that, it gets super nuanced. But what you begin to realize is in every relationship, you got to talk about those things and sort out, how do we make this work so that we're actually honoring our values and not make this about little rules and little past how I was raised stuff, but let's create a value system that we both can be agreed on and then figure out what that looks like.
I like that. And I think there's a bit there of, as we go on this healing journey and we have work with healthy communication with others, we're generally trying to move toward a secure relationship. And I know when people talk about attachment, they talk about the word secure and secure attachment and secure relationships. And so could you share, what does secure actually feel like inside the body? And I'll do this as the coin flip. I'll let either of you decide who wants to share first for this one.
I can go first. That's a good question. Is anyone truly ever secure, Andy? Just kidding. Sure, but I think there's a important difference between being secure and being perfect. And kind of like what Tim was talking about, right? We often have this idea that a healthy relationship means we're never going to get hurt. And so I think the same thing goes for, that we have this idea that a secure relationship means I'm never going to have, negative emotions or even fears. But I think in theory, what a secure relationship should be is it should be safe. And what is safety? It's kind of like what we were just talking about, right? It's not that we'll never get hurt, but that when we are hurt, we can talk to the person about it and that we know things are going to get better, that they're going to be resolved, that that person didn't mean to do it. Or if they did, which maybe is leaning into unsafety if they're intentionally hurting you, but that they're going to correct and apologize and go through that experience. But I also think, so that's kind of like the dynamics of the relationship. But when we look at attachments, that's our internal world, right? And so I think when we start to have more secure attachment, we're not living out of our fears anymore. So that fear of abandonment is one of those deepest wounds that we develop from childhood trauma because we were abandoned. We were constantly abandoned by mom or dad, not just physically, of course, but emotionally, right? They weren't present for you. They weren't attuned to you. They didn't meet all of your needs. And so we constantly felt their withdrawal and we constantly felt alone in this world, which is one of the most painful things. And so as an adult, as soon as there's a fear of their withdrawal, it can activate that fear mode, which causes the dysregulation, which we were talking about, which causes kind of the either overcompensation where people go into the anxious attachment and then they're clinging to the person, trying to resolve the issue or whatever it is, or they're withdrawing and they're pulling away and they're closing their heart. So I think if I were to put it into the simplest answer, a secure attachment would be despite whatever conflicts or issues arise in a relationship, I still feel secure in that I know that person's still going to be there for me. I know that person's going to remain healthy, that whatever conflict we face, we can face together and get through to the other side. And those fears don't have to activate for fear of them leaving me or for me being alone in my pain. So, while that is a very complicated question, that would be my most simple answer.
Yeah. And one thing that I tease out of that is it's almost like that the concept of object permanence, that the relationship itself has object permanence, that I'm not having these fears or these old wounds, that I can still rely that it's going to be there, that I trust that it's still going to be there, even if there are hurts or other things that are happening in the present moment.
And I think one thing to add before Tim jumps in is the other aspect of secure, like that internal security, is also that I don't need the relationship. Yes, the relationship would be good, but that's where that codependence can start to trickle in, is that I need to have that person there. So yes, I can have the security that we can work through things, but maybe the person passes away, or maybe that person, for all I know, goes off the rails because of their own stuff and becomes unsafe. My security is knowing that I'm still safe within myself, despite that person being in or out of my life. And so even if that person were to start mistreating me, I have security enough that I could walk away from it because I don't need the relationship in order to have my own sense of identity. So I think that's important to clarify too, because we also don't want to say we all need intimate relationships. Of course, we need relationships. We're human, blah, 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 blah. But that security has to be internal.
Yeah, I think big picture to me, your question needs a qualification, and that is feeling connection or attachment. There's really almost two levels within the limbic brain of feeling that we end up talking about. So let me back up to Breanne as a little wee girl. She had this strong attachment need to her dad and would come home from school, sit on my knee, tell me all about her day, verbally process. And she would just glow with warmth because she had connected with dad and was able to be fully authentic. And so to a child, attachment is very much a feeling. I feel safe. I feel loved. I feel connected. I feel seen. I feel heard. It's such a warm, joyful, wonderful feeling to have it. The reality, though, is as you grow into your cortex, Breanne could go to Germany and still know she's connected, but not have all those feelings. So that connection to me as a person grows it shifts from a predominantly limbic brain feeling to more of a cortex understanding awareness. I can go to dad anytime I need to talk because he's there. I just know it from years of experience that he's there. Okay, so then the second piece, and this is where you layer the limbic brain. When Breanne was in her teens and started to get into some of her own things that became issues, she began lying to me. So she would come home and tell me a lie. So I was attuned to her. I was trying to connect to her. The home was safe. I was there, but yet something had come between us. And it was her refusal to be honest and authentic and deal with her behaviors. So I like to use the illustration of the two chairs. So when Breanne was little, her chair, my chair facing each other, honest connection. What was happening in her teens was she was turning her chair and the connection was being broken, but my chair was still facing her. Now, what happens in many complex trauma homes is the parent then turns their chair and says, now I'm going to punish you. You're breaking the connection. Okay, I'll break the connection. Now you have to earn it back. But I kept my chair facing her. So the day that she turned her chair back, there was connection again. And so what I think for many people is realizing that connection, there are days where I feel a bit distant, and it could be because Kim's busy, Kim's off running around with friends, is kind of ignoring me, but yet deep down I know we're still connected. So there's part of some stuff that potentially is threatening the connection, but I know that we've been together long enough that it's not going to. So a little bit of me is on alert that I'm feeling a bit of discomfort, but yet deep down there's a settled peace. So one that's important to me is what Breanne was talking about. So Breanne with her sister, they have a little bit of a conflict. All of a sudden their limbic brain says, oh, connection is broken, we're not being connected. But deep down, no, we've worked through stuff before. There's a solidness here. There's a safety. We both are working on our side of the street. It feels like the connection is being threatened, but deep down, I'm pretty secure that it's not. But doesn't mean I can ignore what's happening today. It means I have to allow it and monitor it. And so that's where I think people need to be aware of what their limbic brain is feeling about connection, but not put too much weight in it, and be able to look at the bigger history of facts. Because connection ultimately should be a cortex based on facts thing, not just a limbic in the moment experience of emotions.
There's kind of here like a couple of different things. And one is that there's these two levels where there's a stable base, but outside that stable base, there's still the limbic going on. There's still things going on in reality. And so rather than getting stuck or trapped or distracted by the limbic, being able to hold on to that stable base as you move forward in the relationship. Before I go to the next question, I just want to know if your teenager Breanne needs to respond or add anything to the conversation.
Oh, you don't want to hear from teenager Breanne. Yeah, I think it's a really good analogy because I for sure pulled away for quite a few years. But it's interesting because we talked about my story, Andy, last time I was here. But I remember the day that I hit my bottom. I decided that life was not working out anymore. Things needed to change. And Tim's the first person I called because I knew that he was still there and that he was waiting for whenever I was ready. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I had a parent who was like that because then when I really needed him, he was there for me. But unfortunately, so many people don't have anyone to turn to when they really need help and are ready to make change. So, yeah, I'm very grateful for that. But it definitely made a difference because I was able to turn my chair back knowing that someone was there to support me because I wasn't in a place where I could do it alone. I tried that. It didn't really work.
I think I'm gonna keep this next question to begin with you, Breanne. Then I think that's a great segue into earlier you talked about the family system and we've been talking about trauma. And we talk about repetition, compulsion, or things like that. There's a sense of like familiarity. And many people end up feeling drawn to unhealthy people because it feels familiar. How can we transition out of that to start choosing healthier relationships when that whatever is different feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar often comes with a sense of danger?
Yeah, that's a good one. Mainly because I think like in working with complex trauma now for a few years, it's the recurring issue is relationships. People do lots of healing work, but then they continue to end up in the same relationship pattern, and they go back and it's, well, why? And I think just like you said, Andy, it's we have a template. When we grow up, we learn how to relate to other people based on how we relate to our parents. And so on such a subconscious level, without even realizing it, we're continuously drawn into those same relationships, even if they're not on the surface the same, right? Because so many people are like, I'm never going to end up with anyone who's like my dad. And they might be completely different personalities, but under the surface, it's all the same narcissistic traits that they continue to end up with. So how do you break that pattern? Well, I think one big piece is it is your own inner healing journey, because the more that you are healing yourself, learning what safety looks like, learning what healthy looks like, and even building, as we work on shame, we build up our own sense of self, right? We have more worth, or we see our own worth. Our worth is always the same. And so what happens is the more that gets built up, the more I don't actually want to tolerate that kind of behavior that I might have accepted in the past, because you go, wait a second, I don't deserve that. That's not okay. And we start to be able to catch those things because we are doing that deeper internal work. But I think one of the other aspects of it, and it goes back to the limbic versus cortex brain, is you have to challenge your limbic brain. Your limbic brain is going to get pulled into those relationships that feel good in the moment or kind of give you that hit of dopamine at the beginning. And so it's to challenge, even though this feels good, this already is falling into the same pattern that it was before. And so I need to challenge myself. I need to pull back. I need to do it differently, and trying to interact with people who are different, right? People who maybe they feel a little bit boring, says my limbic brain. But then my cortex brain has to go, but wait, I've learned that maybe boring is a good thing. Even though I'm not getting any of that excitement at the beginning of a relationship, I need to trust that maybe this boring equals stability, and it's not a bad thing. And so I think a lot of it is really just challenging those emotional highs that we want to chase with kind of the learning, even if it feels awkward, even if that person kind of, you don't connect in that same way. But it really comes back to that deeper internal healing and just being able to change your sense of self-worth so that you don't accept the people who are going to hurt you or people who are not good for you. Easier said than done, I know, but
Tim, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I was just thinking as Breanne was sharing that I don't know if people in complex trauma have really thought about this in recovery, but to me, there's an element of recovery that you are actually learning how to manage brain chemicals. So if you think of a child in complex trauma who doesn't have the right release of dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin because they're in pain, their needs aren't being met, they're being hurt all the time. All they're getting is cortisol and adrenaline as their main brain chemicals. And so that's what they get used to. They can even get addicted to it. So what happens once they get out into relationships in adult life is they either keep chasing adrenaline because that's all that gives them excitement and makes them feel alive. So they need cortisol, and then anger feeds that, stress feeds that. So they get wrapped up in chaos and drama and all of that. But then they go, I want to get out of that. So they get into a relationship, but then that releases oxytocin and dopamine. And I think what people don't realize is those two chemicals cause you to put on rose-colored glasses and not see reality. They cause you to go into denial because you're chasing a feeling now, not the facts. You're chasing getting that feeling sustained. And so I got to avoid looking at all the negatives I'm seeing, the red flags I'm feeling, because this person's giving me the feelings. And so part of, to me, recovery is learning how to manage dopamine and oxytocin, which are wonderful chemicals, but to a person from complex trauma, they can be extremely dangerous. And they're released in intimate relationships. When you get romantically attracted to somebody, those are the chemicals are released and it feels good. So it's not just the template that's happening that's causing you to be attracted. It's then that releases chemicals, which makes it even more difficult to be honest about what's really going on. So if I can just add to what Breanne said at the very beginning, and this is probably the one piece of advice that most people don't follow that I give, and that is in early recovery, avoid intimate romantic relationships for 6 months to a year and just focus on healing yourself. Because if you focus on healing yourself, like Breanne said, you're going to get to a point where you go, I don't have to put up with that. That doesn't feel good anymore. Because your own growth and self-awareness starts to change or challenge the templates internally. But if you just automatically keep chasing relationships and I need love, you're just continuing to release dopamine, oxytocin, and you're just chasing those chemicals and putting blinders on to all the negative stuff, and you're keeping yourself in a very unhealthy place. So it's giving yourself permission to just work on yourself and do without that for a while, not forever, but for a while, so that you can get healthy enough to start reframing templates.
I want to do a quick shift into my last category here. Just to begin it though, when we're in relationships, it's often our own traumas triggered by our intimate relationships. And for many people, one of your more intimate relationships is that parent-child relationship. So I'll turn this to you first, Tim, but like, why are they so good at activating our own unresolved trauma inside of us?
I think to me, it's because there's still a part of us that is a child that hasn't healed. And so you've got two toddlers in the playroom triggering each other. And that's, to me, really what's happening is they're not triggering me as a emotionally intelligent adult. They're triggering my little child wounds, and then I act like a child. And then we trigger and feed off each other. And so I think for many parents to realize, especially those coming out of complex trauma, is that your physical age doesn't necessarily match your emotional age. And you could be parts of you that are very emotionally mature, but there can be parts of you that are still 5-year-olds. And that's going to interrupt your ability to parent. And that's going to cause your children to trigger you, which then are going to cause you to wound your children. And so it's really a commitment to grow up emotionally in all areas of life as a parent. And that's, to me, what I say to parents all the time is this: the danger of many complex trauma people that end up as parents is they want to take courses to learn techniques to raise their children well. But the best way to become a good parent is to raise yourself well and to get yourself healed. Because you can learn all the techniques in the world about good parenting, but if you don't heal yourself, when you get triggered, you forget all those techniques and you go back to being that 5-year-old that's stomping their feet and screaming, and you can do a ton of damage in those moments. So it's really focusing on your own internal growth and not just external techniques that becomes key in parenting.
I think two things, maybe a third, we'll see. And it ties into that concept that they're triggering the child in unhealed people. But one reason that kids can be particularly triggering is they don't let parents be selfish. I mean, in theory, narcissistic parent becomes very selfish, but a kid doesn't know how to think about other people. It's all about them, right? And yet if you're still unhealed and somebody's demanding too much of you, then no, I still want it to be about me, right? It's our unhealed parts struggle to think about other people as well. And yet parents have to be very selfless, right? We don't get to make it about ourselves. We have to put all of our stuff aside, and that can be activating. Also to the shame, because I think, again, the shame wants me to be the center of attention. It wants me to be superior. And children do not allow that, especially the young kids. unfortunately, they get molded and adapted into what the parents want them to be if they're still unhealthy. But I think the other piece would just be that when we're unhealed, and this brings back in the emotional dysregulation, we're emotionally dysregulated. But guess what? Children activate all sorts of stress, frustrations, angers, and whatever. And yet, if you're not able to manage emotions as they arise, that can just send them off. And so, I mean, talk to any parent. Parenting is stressful. But if you cannot regulate that yet, then it becomes kind of a constant state of triggers and dysregulation.
I just want to ask a follow-up with this, and I'm going to just shift the focus a little bit to talking more about recovery and hope, but also maybe some of the roadblocks that we go into. So with that, both you and Tim are talking about raising yourself up, individuation, growing in maturity. So for a lot of people who begin recovery, sometimes things start to get worse when they start healing. Could you just talk about like what's going on inside the emotions or the nervous system at that time?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that first. So basically what happens is when we're raised in complex trauma, we have to shut down our emotions to survive. Because if you put a young child in an unsafe environment where they have all sorts of big painful emotions such as shame, fear, sadness, hurt, that is too much for their nervous systems to regulate because they're little, right? That's where the co-regulator comes in a healthy home, and they learn to start managing big emotions, but no one is there for them. And so it becomes overwhelming to their system. And so they shut those emotions down. So then what happens is this just becomes a pattern. Day after day, week after week, year after year, they shut down any form of uncomfortable emotion, any form of pain, any form of fear, anger, shame, all of it. But what happens is then you get into recovery, and guess what? All of that is still trapped in your body. Years and years and years of pain that you've carried. And so part of the healing process is we have to get that out. We have to start connecting with it. Otherwise, we can't heal. We can't heal from pain if we don't even know it's there. But we've become so numb to it. We've learned to ignore it and shut it down. And so what happens is, I like the Coke bottle analogy, is we have to start cracking open the bottle of shaken Coke to start releasing some of that pent up pain. And guess what? That feels like shit because you're basically facing a lifetime of pain that you've avoided because it is too overwhelming. And so yeah, often things have to get worse just in the sense that we're facing the stuff that is there anyway. It's not like we're adding anything onto our plate. We're just, looking at what we've ignored for so many years. And emotionally, it's really intense. That's why we try to go slowly into the journey. We're not planning on unpacking a lifetime of pain in one day. It takes years to uncover that, but it's allowing yourself to start peeking in, to start feeling some of that hurt that you've repressed for so long, because as the Coke bottle starts to open, it does release itself. But for some people, once they get a kind of look at that pain, they run from it because it is too overwhelming. They often circle back because once you get a taste of it, you're like, wait, maybe that is really good for me. But it is really scary and overwhelming at times.
And I would add to that, Andy, if I can, because to me, that's such a key piece. But I think what research is showing that in the first 6 months of recovery, that initially people think, oh, this really is paying off. This is positive. This is really good. I'm learning new tools. I'm getting good results. But then they go through 3 to 6 months where they go, oh, this seems to be getting worse. Is this worth it? Maybe it'd be better to go back to the way things used to be because it's less painful, etc. So part of, to me, what's happening for a lot of people is many that come into recovery are focused on the symptoms of their problem. So I'm feeling anxiety. I'm struggling with addiction. My relationship's struggling. Could you fix the symptoms? And so they're looking for kind of quick solutions to make the pain go away because they have diagnosed that the problem is the external circumstances of my life. And you just need to fix that and everything will be better. But then they come into recovery and they begin to realize those are just symptoms of deeper problems. I've got shame. I've got unhealed wounds. I've got deep core things. And they go, no, this is going to be hard. Now I got to deal with stuff I don't even want to deal with. This sucks. And then they start to go into the grief, the pain, the sexual abuse, all of that, the trauma. And they go, this is too much. This is overwhelming. So that's what Breanne talked about. So it's like you come in and you've really misdiagnosed your pain as being just because of symptoms. Once you see the true symptoms, then you go, this sucks. But then as soon as you go to do a healthy tool, so I'm going to deal with my abandonment wound. I am going to sit in some uncomfortable emotions without becoming super needy, without lashing out. That just triggers fear. That what's going to happen? I'm going to get rejected. I'm going to get abandoned. If I sit here and don't act right now, when I'm uncomfortable, something bad's going to happen. So every new tool leads to triggering fear. That sucks. But then you start to make changes, and then all of a sudden you start to hear people around you go from, oh, we're so happy you're in recovery, we're so happy you're changing, to, we don't like the new you. We kind of wish the new you was the old you. The old you we got along with, because now you're not just changing you, you're changing relationship dynamics. And that's affecting other people. And they like the old relationship dynamics where they were superior, where they could put you as the problem. And you're changing that. And you go, this, all of a sudden I'm feeling opposition. I'm feeling rejection. And so it's just like every step into recovery, you're uncovering new layers of dysfunction, hurts, fears, deeper issues that really cause you to go, is this really worth the effort? And that's where a lot of people want to go back to the original. But what I want people to realize, if you can get through that 6 months, then you start to have a new normal. People are respecting your boundaries. You get a new surrogate family that is safe, that is appreciating who you really are authentically. Then you start to get more positives than potentially what you're feeling as negatives.
I like both of your analogies, one the shaken soda bottle, but then Tim, yours sounds there's this iceberg of trauma where a lot of times what we just see is the top, the symptoms, but there's something much larger underneath. Let me, kind of recognizing that we can go through these discouraging points and that like relationship changes. You mentioned sometimes needing to get a new surrogate family. How can somebody who's going through this difficulty and they've lived years in survival, like how do you begin to rebuild maybe like a sense of hope or a sense of possibility?
I think to me, it's critical that people realize that you got to go baby steps. You got to have incremental growth, both in building a surrogate family, finding safe people, in building trust, all of those, and hope. They don't just happen overnight. There's not some magic download of that in recovery where you just get it handed to you. And so you build it incrementally by slowly learning tools for how do I find safe people? How do I base my sense of hope on facts, not on just feelings? And so gradually over time, you begin to kind of build those things, and it starts to happen. I think, to me, bottom line for many people, what they need to hear is you got to build this stuff incrementally, but the only people that build that stuff incrementally are the people that want it badly enough. You got to be willing to fight for it. You got to be willing to put up with some going through 5 friends before you find a safe friend. And that's discouraging. There's disheartening, discouraging things every day in recovery in the early days. There's obstacles you got to overcome every day in early recovery. And only those that have the determination and commitment that I matter enough to stick at this are going to fight through those things. So there's an element of an internal disposition of I'm worth fighting for. And then there's practical things that you're building that incrementally on top of that.
Yeah. And I think, like, of course, there's many things I would add to this. I'll try and keep it simple. But one is that you still have to make sure you have enough good to outweigh the bad. Because if I've seen many people come in to trauma recovery and they just they dive so deeply into it that they don't give themselves time to breathe. And if you don't have time to breathe, time for breaks, time for even, joy and pleasure, it does become overwhelming. Of course it would, right? And so some people think that they have to do recovery 170%, but guess what? Part of recovery is also learning how to find joy and connection in that as well. It doesn't mean you only have to stay in the muck of it. So of course there's balance to that, but finding those little wins and learning to really appreciate them. So on those bad days, you can go back to, remember when that new tool worked? And remember how good it felt when I had that connection point with that person, so that we have those to hold on to at times where it feels overwhelming. And I think I had another thought around that. What was it? I'm pulling a Tim. I think just within it all, that's what it was. There's like cortex hope and there's limbic hope. We're not always going to feel the hope on a limbic level where we have that great emotion of hope, but it's going back to that knowing, that kind of cortex thought of, you know what, this is going to be all worth it. And I do believe deep down, even if I don't feel it today, I do believe that things are going to get better, kind of by being able to listen to things like this, being able to talk to people who've been through and made it through to the other side of the journey, so that again, you have that anchor to continue to go back to. I've even had clients and I have them like journal things about all the progress they've made, the wins, the things like that. So on days that they're really feeling dark, they can go read those pages of encouragement and be like, but look how far I have come. Look, this actually is worth it. And so, yeah, all of that. Plus, of course, like Tim, I think was saying, there has to be a certain determination and resilience just to be able to push through the difficult times. And it's actually one of the things that complex trauma can create, because any complex trauma kid, well, most complex trauma kids have faced a lot of hardship and have had to push through to survive. And so that's kind of one muscle that they've trained to be able to push through the difficult times and keep going.
Any final things that you'd like to share with our listeners today? And I'll let you go first, Breanne.
I mean, after all that, I think just in light of this kind of last topic of conversation, healing is so complicated, it's nuanced, but it's also unique. Everyone's healing journey is unique. And I think something that I like to remind people of, and remind myself of, to be honest, is we often want to go kind of outsource our healing or look for the answer. Go find it in a book, a podcast, whatever it is, and be like, okay, I have to do A, B, C, D. But your journey is different. So it's not going to look the same. So yes, we can find inspiration, we can find guidance, we can find support, but also allowing yourself to develop enough self-awareness to be able to pivot as you go, to change, to adapt in terms of what you need. But yeah, all of that. And then I think just remembering that one of the biggest pieces of healing is opening up the emotional world. Because yes, we can learn a lot of things upstairs, up in our head. We can understand our trauma. We can understand, learn about the nervous system, all of these things. But until we start to kind of drop that into our bodies, into our emotions, and process through some of the actual pain, then it's just head knowledge. So you really have to be able to step into your emotional world. And while that can be scary, it's helpful to remember also to not do it alone, because we aren't meant to heal alone. And so just finding, again, kind of like we talked about, trying to find healthy people, healthy supports, so that, yeah, you can get through, even if it requires a lot of patience.
Thanks for that, Breanne. And Tim, any final words from you?
I think as I kind of play back this last 2 hours in my mind, is what people are going to hear is recovery is very simple on one level and very nuanced on another level. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the nuances, and the danger for people listening is they go, okay, I don't understand at that level. And then they want to go to what Breanne is saying, that academic, I got to figure out all these nuances, etc. And they almost they analyze it to death, and they get paralyzed by that. And so what to me is, there's always the basics that you have to keep in mind. I need connection. I need to be totally human and intellectual, emotional, relational. I need to meet my 12 needs. That's the basics. I need to figure out how to do that every day. If I do that, the nuances will gradually sort themselves out in my mind. I will gradually become aware of them. So don't get obsessed with, I got to figure out nuances. Stick to the basics keep yourself open to learning more and more, and the nuances will gradually clarify themselves to you.
Thank you for that. Well, Tim and Breanne, I just want to thank you so much both for your insights, for the clarity that you bring to these conversations. I really appreciate both of you approach trauma. There's a little bit of a different angle, but there's just a lot of heart underneath what you've shared today. And to everyone listening, we hope that this conversation maybe gives you a little bit more clarity for yourself and language for what you're feeling and some compassion for what you've lived through. Complex trauma just really touches every part of our lives. And to reflect what Tim just said here at the end a little bit, you don't have to navigate it by yourself. That connection is so important. And so until next time, take care of yourselves. It's worth it. Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.